I'd like to introduce Dongshin Chang, who has come all the way from America. I first came across his work when I was researching my own book about Thomas Burke, which has a large section on pantomime and representations representations of Chinese-ness on the British stage. And his work was hugely helpful to me because he's done all this amazing archival stuff on late 18th and early 19th representations, spectacle and burlesque and very, very early forms of pantomime. And that was all in his thesis, which I had shipped over from America all that while ago. And so that's why I thought he is the perfect person to kickstart today. And then I came to understand that he actually also is a theatre practitioner. So I'll have to read this from here because what he does is a form of traditional Chinese theatre called kunchu. Is that how I've pronounced that?
Kunchu.
Yes, kunchu. And he performs the young male role type Xiao Sheng. He also studies Japanese dance Nihon Buyo. And in 2006, he co-wrote, directed, and produced Confessions, which is an adaptation of the Greek Phaedra myth that incorporates Chinese theatre concepts in your production of it. And that was staged in the 2006 Fringe Theatre Festival in New York. And Dongshin he's a professor in the Department of Theatre, Hunter College, City University of New York. And now finally he has a sabbatical and a research award to write up his research for his book representing China on the historical London stage. So it will be great to see that in publication. So I'll stop talking now and turn it over to you.
Okay. Thanks so much, Anne. Thanks so much for having me here to share with you about my research. So I'm very grateful that I would say probably Anne is the first person in the whole wide world who who cites my work, and I'm really excited. And who read that. So now I know beyond my dissertation committee, there's someone out there who find it interesting. And now I'm going to turn the manuscript into a book, so I hope that it will come out in a year or two. So you would notice that actually I changed the talk of my topic. So actually in the program that I proposed to discuss one specific production, and then last week I presented the production actually in Lancaster in a different conference, and Anne and I had a talk afterwards. And then she suggested that actually probably I should tailor my talk in relation to the whole series of talks and today's other speakers' talks better. So I went back and I read the program, and I thought that might as well. So you see that I am like lecture free. I don't have any paper with me. So please stop me. We start late. So let me know when I should stop. So I thought that maybe this, as I'm the first speaker, so probably I'm going to use my talk as a starting point. And then I know there are many, many exciting talks afterwards. So I'm just going to provide a beginning, and then, throughout the course of the day, probably we would hear more, and then connections will start to happen between our talks. So I changed my talk to representing China on the historical London stage. That's the book. And so I subtitled the talk as Research and Beyond. So I want to talk about a little bit more than just a little bit about the book, then more about my life journey, as a scholar / practitioner. As a Taiwanese who went to New York to study, to get my PhD, and then now. So it's kind of like looking back after probably more than a decade, about 2 decades, about what I've been doing as a scholar and practitioner. So that's what I would like to do. So first of all, I would like to start how this whole thing started about my project, and then I'm going to talk about this shot. Can you see this slide? Is that all right? First of all, I would like to talk about this book project and how I started as a scholar and on this side. So I'm going to talk about this shot. it might look familiar to some of you. And then secondly, I would like to talk about my research. First of all, is about the historical background that I look into. And then thirdly, I would like to talk about the actual theatrical productions that I have examined. So, and then lastly, this is a little bit of self-promotion, and that's me in costume and makeup. So I would like to talk about my actual work, if I have time. So you will see where I'm from and what I'm doing. So, so this is a shot from Chinatown by Google Map. You can do it. Of Manhattan. So there are quite a few Chinatowns in New York. At least there are 3 or 4. So, so this one is in Manhattan in New York City. It's like the main island. I was born and grew up in Taiwan. I did my undergrad and master's in Taiwan. My master's is on Chinese theater. So I researched on a Chinese playwright in the early 18th century. Then I received a fellowship, and with that fellowship, I went to New York to do my PhD at New York University. So I was totally out of context when I first arrived in New York. So I remember why I'm showing you this shot is that this is a typical corner of Chinatown. So when I first arrived in Chinatown, I find it fascinating and very strange. You know, I felt like I was traveling back in time. I saw things familiar but unfamiliar to me. Seems that I was wondering why they are in New York, and when I look at all these vendors, etc., and then I was a stranger to Chinatown because I couldn't speak Cantonese. So actually, I didn't know what's going on, but I can read the signs. So it's a very interesting experience. I see familiar faces. I assume that some of you of Chinese heritage, their various dialects, etc. So it's a very complex picture about who's Chinese, and so that's why I foregrounded my talks by saying that I'm from Taiwan. So I remember very clearly that during the first semester, we walked into this alley, and then we had if some of you could read like a Cantonese restaurant to the left called 黑运来, 喜运来, 大饭店, to have an end of semester banquet with my teacher who taught Chinese theater in diaspora. And I remember it snowed, and I was so excited. I never saw snow before. So I went out, then my classmates look at me like puzzled. What's going on with this guy? I said, I never experienced temperature below like 10 degrees Celsius, and it was snowing. So that was the beginning point. At the earlier trajectory of my career, I felt, I'm like an outsider to the U.S. because at that time I thought that I would just finish the degree and go back to Taiwan, as well as even in the Chinese community in New York. And so that has been something that intrigued me, sometimes puzzled me and troubled me a lot. So that's something that is always on my mind. Then throughout my study, of course, I studied like representations of China in popular culture and cinema. So of course, I encountered this depiction of the by Sex Aromas, the Fu Manchu series. Of course, when I first started, I was like, that character looks interesting. But why would he look that way as a Chinese character? Why would he have all these, kind of mustache, and then not to look into his fingernails and the cap, etc.? Of course, I'm totally aware that is a non-Chinese. So that led me into thinking further about how the Chinese were presented in the past and why that way. So that's one example. And then in theater, I study Asian American dramas, and then David Henry Hwang is a big name for all these studies in contemporary theater. And then his famous plays *And Butterfly* in 1988 that won the Tony Award. And then later on, he rewrote Roger and Hammerstein's *Flower Drum Song*. So I had to study his plays, and I went to his talks, etc. I said earlier that I studied Chinese theater while I was in Taiwan, and then you could see that on the book cover, this Song Liling, the lead actress in the play, performs Chinese opera. Then I suddenly found that in many plays about Chinese or China and the Chinese, they always feature Chinese theater. Always there's some characters who perform some kind of Chinese theater, act, etc. And this is the movie version by Zhang Long, Song Liling in *And Butterfly*. So there's something about this connection between Chinese theater or performing Chinese theater in the depiction of China and the Chinese. Always there's a very strong connection. I wonder why. And so I wanted to know how that happened. So that's one thing. And then this is from the 2002 Flower Johnson, and this is a famous number called "I Enjoyed Being a Girl" in the musical. And when I look at all these images, I was always very intrigued by the costume and the set, like the pointed head, and then as well as this kind of angular design. It's like, why would people think that's Chinese? Because then what does that say about all these depictions? Where did they come from? So that triggered this whole process of me of looking back. So I would say that the book project, in a way, is for me to look back and think forward. So I thought that, and I still believe that the more I know about the past, the better I know how I can move forward. So basically, that's the book project. So following, I would like to share with you some of the research that I have conducted. I know that this afternoon there will be talks more about the later periods, such as Anne's book, highly recommended. That I would say that there's lots of research in this as well. So I think Anne is also a person that definitely she's highly knowledgeable about the depictions and representations in the past. So I'm going to tailor my talk to even earlier, to the 19th century and earlier. So then I picked the last dynasty of China, the Qing dynasty, as the historical period for me to conduct my research, because the Qing dynasty is really interesting. It went through this reversal. At first, it had this strong power, and the dynasty was considered the most powerful, empire of the world for quite some time, until they swept the change of power. And I find this power change interesting. And I also saw the connection between the change of power and the depiction of China and the Chinese on stage. So that's something I thought that I would like to bring up. So throughout the Qing dynasty, there were accounts and reports, visitors to China who came over to the empire, and then through their depictions, people in the West, including Britain, other European countries, knew more about China. So I'm going to share with you some of the important accounts, and I strongly believe they influence the depictions of China and the Chinese. So this is from this important documentary, an account provided by Martino Martini, a Jesuit father who resided in China in the 17th century. At that time, Christianity, or I say the Catholic missionaries, went all the way to China because they wanted to convert the Chinese. But for the Jesuit fathers, actually they found that Chinese is not a barbarian land. So the Jesuit fathers they had to learn the Chinese language and culture, and even put on the costume and dress and learn Chinese in order to teach Chinese Christianity. And then when they came toward the end of or beginning at the 17th century, they encountered this dynasty change between the Ming and the Qing dynasties. And the huge event is about the change of the dynasty. So this is a fictional depiction of an actual historic account of the fall of the Ming dynasty, because the last emperor of China did commit suicide and killed his ladies when the Qing army sacked the palace. And this was the huge event that was reported by the missionaries, such as Martini. So Martini's the bello tartanico, I believe that means the veilers tatters. to talk about how they took over China, actually was highly popular. It was reprinted various times. So you will see that. So there are some interesting costume. Did you see the turban and the feather and the sword? So this is imaginary about the Chinese at that time from the illustrations. And then another thing that I would like to say, and some people already did research on this, is about this gesture of the princess that could be related to certain European art depiction of martyrs, female martyrs, how they suffer. So there's something about this. And then, so I will come back to this a little bit later. And this is, again, about the Tatar emperor, Temmingus from Martini. And this is in a different translation written in Latin, bello and tataricum. Again, it's about the same account. And the Manchurians who founded the Qing dynasty were called the Tatars. So I conducted a whole series of research into this idea of the Tatars. Why the Manchurians were called the Tatars? Because they were the barbarians to the Chinese, like the Tatars in the east to Europe, like the invaders. So there's something about this. So I would like to draw your attention to the costume, and then so you will see the recurring the image from the 17th century. So in the 17th century, I would say that this was a huge historic account, contemporary account that occurred in China and that attracted lots of attention in Europe, lots of plays and writings on this. And there was this known idea about China that was no longer the cafe, the mystic land in the past, as reported by Marco Polo. So that's one thing there. And then in the 18th century, so along with the knowledge about the empire, and then once the trade routes were resumed, they were like a huge interest in Chinese goods. So then in the 18th century, and I think that you could see this is on the answer book topic called the chinoiserie. So there is this huge movement and interest in importing Chinese goods into Europe, not only in England, but also in other European countries. So the Chinese goods inspire all these movements in decorative arts, gardening designs, etc. So, for example, these the chinoiserie designs to have the vases, and then this kind of angular shape to take the so use the chinoiserie design to the Chinese decorative arts and objects, especially porcelain, inspire these arts movements to design something that's not like a Renaissance or that's more like a Baroque and Rococo. So these, and then you will see, especially from the porcelain to tea, then you could see that they are like a teapot that in imitation of China and the Chinese, and then you will see the teacups, etc. So in the 18th century, I would say that the strong commercial interest did inspire lots of interest in China beyond the historical accounts, but more about the goods, from the porcelain to tea, and tea eventually becomes the staple drink of Britain. So that's very interesting for me to see the transition and from trade. So that's something that I find interesting. And then this is another chinoiserie example. So you will see that from the architecture, and I didn't have a picture of a gardening design, as well as this kind of winding, like a gardening, not like a symmetrical design, etc. And then you will see in decoration, this is by a French painter. This is a tapestry that you hang on the wall, and this is called the Chinese Fair. So there's a imagination about the Chinese when they celebrated, and there were productions about this. And this basic layout has been highly popular. So you will see the Chinese people on the tapestry, and you will see the parasol, you will see their dress. So there's something that later you will see in lots of actual theatrical productions. So I would say that in the 18th century that the chinoiserie movements could not be ignored, that how they highly influenced later on the depictions and representations of China and the Chinese, and how these heritages are passed on to later. And then in the late 18th century, you will see that there was this historic event, and that is highly important for the Anglo-Chinese or European Chinese, however you want to put it, the relations, is this visit by Lord George Macartney to China. So, because Britain really wanted to establish official relationship with China, because there was this imbalance in trade, then Britain would really like to improve this situation. So Lord George Macartney was the first one appointed to visit China, and later on in the early 19th century, there was another embassy that visited China. So these embassies, of course, they were official, mission. They had official. They have to. They brought a lot, and also with lots of agendas. And unfortunately, very little of the agendas were achieved through the mission, these embassies. And what the embassies discovered was that probably China was not as strong as people thought. So that was their turning point, to see that some accounts depicted China as backward, and that triggered this whole reversal about the earlier image of China being a grand empire of high refined culture to an empire that's huge with lots of goods that could be invaded and then to take away and to be partitioned. So these two are, I know these two look vague because I found this two from the British Library. So you could go to the British Library to see the actual sketches. So these two sketches were sketched by the draftsman of the embassy. So who did lots of illustrations, because that was the first embassy. So his job was to depict and portray China as authentically as possible. So he came back with a thick sketchbook with lots of illustrations, and then later on these illustrations received popular reprinting. So on the left you will see the Lord Macartney, and then Chinese Emperor on the left. Probably you couldn't really see the Macartney there, but I would say that this embassy was really famous for this Macartney's resistance to koto, to be on his force. So he was only willing to kneel on one knee to show that. So that was this. At that moment, it was highly the tension was really high at that moment, so people wrote a lot on this moment. And on the left is a sketch of Macartney in his royal, robe, so probably the official, dress. So this is kind of the conflict and confrontation right there. So and these are some of the sketches that were colored later on when the sketches were brought back. So you will see the Chinese people that are depicted or sketched by the draftsman on the trip. So you will see the Chinese people, not only the Chinese people, you will see the fort at the back, and then you will also see the cities. Let's see the pagodas and the you want to call the junks, etc., and the bridge. So I would say that these first-hand accounts provided lots of interest for people to see, real Chinese people, by people who did go over there and portray as truthfully as possible. And these materials were definitely used, in my opinion, in lots of theatrical productions. So later on, and how people took on these, and of course not just to the letter, how they kind of took inspiration from this and do a dramatization. So that's something I would like to bring to your attention. And then this is a caricature of this historic moment, and this one actually is far more popular than the authentic depiction. So this one actually is in circulation, and you can buy prints that are now still online. You can search Macartney Embassy, and then you can get a print of this. So you see the fat Chinese emperor and Macartney there. And so even in the depictions, you still can see a little bit about the dress, etc. So that's something I find interesting. So I wouldn't bore you with more historical materials, but what I want to say is that through these historical materials, I did see the connection between people's encounters with China and the stage depictions and representations. And I would say that from Macartney's embassy to China in the late 18th century, the next, I guess, then that's much the next event, bigger event that was much more well known. And I guess Simon, our next speaker, will talk about it, is the Opium Wars. Then from there we have the Boxer Rebellion at the beginning of the 20th century, and my research ended at the end of the overthrowing of the Qing and the establishment of the Republic of China. So that's where I ended. But by sharing the previous images with you, I thought that it's highly interesting to see how historical events were closely connected to stage portrayals and depictions of China and the Chinese. But and I would justify this by saying that actually, since it's a theater, so there's definitely a room for imagination and dramatic depiction, and the room is definitely allowed not only for the Westerner in China as well. So and I'm in the following, and I think I'm still doing okay, right? Okay, good. Yeah, I think I can do it. So in the following, I'm just going to show you a few productions that I look at, and from this production to the actual work that I do myself. So so this is the first production that I studied. There's another book that I couldn't put into my backpack. Another book that is that was just out last year called Performing China. And it's about more like a labor, not only about theater, but it's also about literary, cultural perceptions of China and the Chinese in the 17th and 18th century. And this is a very interesting production called The Conquest of China by the Tartars. And it was produced at the Drury Lane. And so in this production, the actual accounts of the fall of the Ming Dynasty were incorporated, including the stepping that we just saw, and of course in this production we also saw that the like I should say the English takes on this historic event, because the princes, like the invading in this dramatization, the Tatar prince is eventually moved by the righteousness of the Chinese, and he decides to rule China with civilization. So there's something about this romantic idea. The Tatars, they are more valorous, but on horse, etc. But eventually they'll be conquered by the refined culture of China. So actually, in the end, it's kind of interesting. You have this kind of reconciliation in this production, and then. In this production, there were also like other gory depictions of the war, like not only to the stepping, but also people being killed. Lots of women die on stage when. So I was peeping behind the curtain, because that in the past would be like revealing, changeable scenery. Once the scenery was parted, then you see a group of women die on the stage, with daggers and poisons, etc. So this was a production that was done in the 17th century. And then now in the 18th century, together with the chinoiserie art, there were lots of so-called the Chinese dance or Chinese festivals, the ballets. Then you will see all these Chinese characters. Did you see that they pointed heads? If you compare with the other other non-Chinese characters, you see the difference. But I would say it's the pointed heads and this kind of cut and also the hand gesture, etc., to symbolize the Chinese. So there's something about this. And then usually in all these Chinese ballets, there was always a procession of different characters, different Chinese characters. They were on stage in this costume and dress. I wonder if that sounds familiar for you to think about the Nutcracker. There's this short segment of the Chinese dance. So to think about this heritage back that came a long way. And then the most popular play that about China in the 18th century is this play called The Orphan of China. It was based on an incomplete translation of a real Chinese play. And that was taken by Voltaire in France, and then later on in England by Arthur Murphy, and they were highly popular in the mid-18th century. So in these productions of The Orphan of China, you will see again is about how the Tatars are invading China and how the virtuous Chinese Mandarin sacrificed his son to save the Chinese kingdom, and then you will see the Mandarin and his wife, and how they struggle between patriotism and like a parental love for their child. So you will see that here, interestingly, the print at the left was from the probably 1780, and on the right is from 1790s. Then you will see that the left is from the French, and then the right is by the British. So you will see that even though they are depicting similar stories, the costume and designs show some kind of interesting trait. And I would say that just by looking at the Mandarins on the right, in the French production, actually the Mandarin does really look like a real Chinese Mandarin with the cap and the royal robe. But the right, by the British production, actually it looks more like a missionary, like Jesuit father in China. So even through this, we will see the incorporation. And then something that you can really see at the back is about the bridge and pagoda, etc. So I would say by this time, to represent China, the costumes develop certain kind of tropes. You know, if you want to depict the Chinese, you have to have certain kind of dress, costume. You have to have certain kind of scenery. And then in the early British pantomimes, and then we get a little bit more that we see this on the left is a Chinese slave. From Aladdin pantomime. It's performed by Joseph McGreedy. Then you will see that. And I would say that again is about this kind of the dress could be compared to one of the sketches about taken from the embassies. And then on the right is about a Chinese home merchant. So you will see it's more like a clown, but you could see the pigtails, right? Then, but you will see this is more like a clown costume. So I would say that in the popular entertainment, actual information was mingled with theatrical conventions. And then I will quickly go through the next three, then go to the last bit. Is that good? Okay. Then, so my chapter, my research ends in the early 20th century, and that is a time period that I find especially fascinating because beginning from the mid-19th century, there were huge waves of Chinese immigrations abroad to England, to Europe, then to the U.S. to follow the gold mines, etc. So throughout my research, I find that the presence and of Chinese communities abroad in diaspora affected the stage representations and depictions of China and the Chinese, as well as complicated this whole phenomenon because they are, again. So I know that later probably we'll have this discussion about, because people who grew up say Asian Americans or British, Chinese, British, they when they see this, they will have really different reactions to all these depictions than what I would have. So, so in the late 19th century, just to talk about a few examples, these are. Still on the left, we have this kind of fancy for musical comedies about, to visit this fancy land. This production was still so discuss here. So I'm not going to talk more like about visiting this fantastic, unreal Chinese like place to have like a romantic pursuit. And on the right, you will have Mr. Wu. It's a griot melodrama about this evil Oxford-educated Chinese merchant who decides to kill his British rival's wife, first by seducing her and then trying to kill her. And then we have this villain portrayed by Matheson Len, a British actor. And what intrigued me the most actually is this production that was imported to London from China called The Yellow Jacket. That if you could read Chinese, actually when I look at this, I found it quite authentic in the stage setup, even in the depiction. So actually for this production, the theater producers, I sincerely believe they consulted the local Chinese community in New York and in San Francisco to come up with the set and design. But of course, the story is fanciful. So I would like to end my talk by coming back to myself. I hope this is not too much of a self-promotion, but as a way to really to have a conversation with the later speakers. Is that after doing all these research on how China and the Chinese were produced or represented in the past, of course I also wanted to put in my own say into this, or how I may do something about this. People can do whatever they want creatively, but and what would be my way to do it by understanding the past. So what I chose to do is that while doing all this research, I continue to learn Kunqu. Kunqu is a form of Chinese theater that's older than Beijing opera. Maybe some of you know, and it's highly poetic. And actually, there's a Kunqu Beijing opera group in London. If you need the contact, and I can tell you about it. So I thought that what I can do is that I would do actual practice through that way, that I would know Chinese theater much, much better, and I can teach it. And I can also show people what I know about Chinese theater. But more importantly is how I can take that training and learning. I'm an amateur, so just to put it up front, I was not trained from childhood. So when you think about Chinese theater, it's about the gongs and the tumblings. Sorry, I can't do that. But I do know what I know. And so I learned in the young male role type. So this is what I do in 2010 with my classmates. So that's me playing the Emperor of Tang. So we are having a banquet. So you will see my costume and the traditional dress as an emperor. And I was with my Empress Lady Yang. And you will see Lady Yang's headpiece actually was really the piece that was used in *And Butterfly*, the film version, was quite authentic in that, to use that. And this is what I do earlier this year. From the Peony Pavilion called Finding a Portrait, in which I play a young scholar. So you will see so from this, I want to say is that from the costumes, movements, and even to scenes, etc. I thought that what is exciting about Chinese theater is really it's beyond the costumes and makeup and music, but it's really about this overall theater experience, and also its theatrical concept on stage. So finally, I had an opportunity to put together a production in actual, live, and I think that's really the test, how to put ideas into actual practice. And I hope that after I finish the book, I will be able to go back to do this, because that's what I love to do. So I took on a Greek story about the Phaedra story, who falls in love for her stepson. Maybe some of you know. And so we started out actually with the actors. We went through a basic training just to get an idea about what theater actors will move on stage, and some of you might know this is called 跑圆场. And then we use the movements to create something creatively, just to use the movements. So not to copy exact, but it's how to use the movements in a way that will be meaningful and powerful. And then these are the shots. Actually, you will see that they don't look Chinese at all. Right. So, so I will end my talk here in that doing this actual production was really, really exciting, but at the same time was frustrating as well because the production received mixed reviews. You could Google. So some people say that it's just not Chinese at all. What is Chinese about it? So, and that's an interesting subject that I could think about. That what it means to be Chinese and China than to depict China. So of course I took on a Greek story and then I tried to put concepts and ideas like the abstract staging into it. So I guess that concludes my talk. I hope that I didn't take up too much time. And then I know that following we have many wonderful talks and I hope that my talk will inspire some questions and thoughts, and then we will be able to have further discussion throughout the course of today. And thank you.